Hello, everyone. We are back with, I think, our third episode of Philosophy and Dialogue. I am Hypatia, and I have my co-host Pandora here, and we're going to be talking about Nikolai Berdyev's Slavery and Freedom, which was published in 1939. And Berdyev's years are 1874 to 1948, and he's basically, we can describe him as a Russian Christian existentialist. Pandora, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Glad to be doing a book by this author with you, and just really looking forward to getting into this work. He's just a beloved philosopher of mine, so I'm super stoked.
Yeah, I discovered him through you as I have various amazing books that are important to me now, so much gratitude. Before we kind of get into the ideas, I'd love to know, is there like a story on how you discovered him or like when you encountered Berdyaev?
Yeah, funny enough, I was living out at the family ranch in West Texas, and I think my mom was like, "You need to read this book." It was, I think, called The Shack. It's like a Christian kind of like novel-ish type book. But the story takes place of this guy who finds himself in the middle of the woods in a shack, and he like meets God there, and she's like a black woman. And pretty cool book. I didn't quite get all the way through it, as I don't for so many books. But in reading that book, one of the chapters had an opening quote, and it was by Nicholas Berdyaev, and it was, I think, Anarchy and Christianity. It was a quote from that book of his. Very short book. It's more like a pamphlet. It's like a, or no, yeah, I think it was. I'm almost certain. No, I think I'm actually screwing the story up. I think it was. I had to be from that book. Um, I think there was another book. Anarchy and Christianity is actually from Jacques Ellul, I think is how you pronounce his name. It's a
Okay.
French French anarchist philosopher, Christian. But I'm sure. Oh, it was from a book called, I think the quote in that book by Nicholas Berdyaev was from the book um, "The Realm of Spirit and the Realm of Caesar." I'm almost certain of it. And so I saw this quote and I was like, "Oh, this is incredible." And then I had to look up that book and buy it immediately. And I've just been in love with him ever since.
That's so cool. I absolutely love that sequence of events when we are reading something and like someone mentions a name and then we have to look it up, and this just happens all the time everywhere. I just put it down to like a Jungian synchronicity.
Yeah, it's like you just follow the breadcrumbs to wisdom and knowledge. It's, it's great. You just every book leads to another book, leads to another book. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you for sharing. That's super cool. So, just to let our viewers know, if you haven't read this book, we're going to be talking about parts one and two, or most of that today. And so, basically, taking from the title Slavery and Freedom, Berdyaev talks about the various ways we can be enslaved, which I think, is a topic that any of us could really get into. But I'm really interested in getting down to what Berdyaev, I'll say his name like you're saying, what Berdyaev is, getting at, like his very specific existentialist, but also like Christian existentialist, the nuances between, like, in his slavery. So he starts off talking about personality. So that's where I really want to start off with a question. But part two has the different kinds of slavery. He gets into the slavery of being, an ontology, the slavery of God. He has a very interesting idea, I think, of what God is and is not. That's different from at least the way I grew up in my like Christian evangelistic, charismatic, Pentecostal church. He talks about the cosmic lure and even the slavery to nature, the slavery to society, the slavery to civilization, kind of like a Freudian civilization and its discontents, that there are pros and cons to that. And then the lure of individualism. So I'm going to start off asking you, Riley, what you think about this quote. It's actually the last page of part two. I know his first chapter is on personality, but I really liked it's on page 138 in my book.
Okay.
And it says, free personality is a flower that blooms, but rarely in the life of the world. The immense majority of people is not made up of persons. In this majority, personality is either still potential or else already disintegrated. Individualism certainly does not mean that personality is rising into prominence. And when I read this, I thought about the many philosophers, thinking about like Heidegger and even Kant and Nietzsche and many others who say, maybe even Plato, who say that, this awakening or the enlightening or whatever kind of philosophy they're talking about and message they're providing, like not a lot of people, get it. So my question to you is, what do you think Berdyaev means when he says personality, or how would you define that term? Because it's really important to him. And why is it rare? Do you agree with that? Those are my questions for you.
Yeah, good questions. I would say, it's a question I have myself, actually. But I would, my best stab at it is I've always kind of related it to Jung's theory of individuation. Like
Mm.
they're using different words, right? Like, and it can get confusing because Berdyaev will be like, no, like individualism is, not. It's like, um, it's like a lure, right? Like you can get trapped into the slavery of just like being like an egotistical or like self-centered center of your own world or whatever. So that's not what they're not talking about the same thing. He's not like bashing like the idea of Jung's theory of individuation. I think they're really just using different terminology to kind of express things that are, I would think, very similar in their different ways of understanding it. And that's just basically like kind of like self-realization or like for Dayev, like he's really concerned about like the spirit of man and man finding freedom in the existential center or wholeness that constitutes one's true identity and one's true calling in response to the gift of existence provided by God and our place in this world. Not being of this world, but like in it and being of like a spiritual um, reality that transcends it, if you will. And so for him, the reason why personality is something that isn't like a given in just being a quote unquote person, like you're a person, I'm a person, we're all persons, but like, do we have developed personalities or not? And like he says in that quote, it's like they're in potential or it's like disintegrating, right? It's like
Mhm. Yeah.
it's either growing and blossoming or it's like deteriorating and decaying and dying. And so depending on where we are spiritually, it's gonna like factor that directional growth or yeah, the opposite, just like the destruction of our person. And I think it is uncommon for people ultimately. I don't think it's a given. I think he's right. I think it takes a lot of inner work
Mhm.
to develop these aspects of ourselves that he's referring to. And I don't think we live in a society that teaches that work very well. The best thing you can like hope for is something like akin to church. And I don't think the church culture is very good at addressing the issues very well. Like you get some churches that focus more in on like discipleship rather than just like being a quote unquote good Christian, which I think is more in line with something of what like Berdyaev would say is important in being like a Christian is like we want to be quote unquote like students of um, the Christ. Like we don't want to just be like believers in Christ and have like a dogmatic, mental assent to a particular claim like Jesus is the Son of God. He came and lived a perfect life and died and rose again. If we believe in him, we'll go to heaven. Like, okay, now you're good. You can go off. You're a full-fledged person now. Like he would be like, no, that's ridiculous. That's not it. Um, so, but at the same time, like he gets into it with like that part on our slavery to God. And it's like, like it's not about just like blindly being a disciple of Christ either. It's a little more nuanced than even that. So it's a difficult task that I don't think our culture very much educates us on. So I don't think it's very common. And I do sometimes wrestle with like exactly what he's getting at all the time by his notion of like personality, if I'm being completely honest. But I do love this book because I feel like it answers some of the questions that I've been wrestling in regards to his philosophy for a long time. And I hope I can, through the course of these two episodes, tease that out a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great connection between personality and Jung's individuation, just kind of thinking about the whole self and bringing in inner work. And, I agree. I think that society is very externalizing. Like we have to look out into the world, into the world of objects, and think about work and think about success and maybe like academic degrees or getting like the house and the family or whatever it is. We are just very like outward oriented. And I think that I'm still figuring out the creation of my personality because, Jung says that we don't really switch to the inner from the outer until maybe like 35. And that was very much true for me. Now I'm kind of like on this journey of inner work and shadow work and dream interpretation and trying to understand, what's mine or what I want to be mine and what's more like the personality that I constructed as a trauma response from maybe like childhood. And there's no real blueprint for that. You just kind of have to journey through it.
Yeah, and in the Jungian perspective, that's why I like Jung a lot because right, he gives like a lot of methods for tapping into what that blueprint of the your real soul, so to speak, is by like things like active imagination or dream interpretation or imaginary play. Like it gives like even just like spontaneous like art or writing. There's like a lot of shadow work and self-discovery that goes along with like different modalities of approaching psychology from the Jungian point of view and getting in touch with kind of those hidden aspects of ourselves that are, yeah, kind of relegated to the darkness as a result of having been born into the family and the culture and the society and the time period that we inhabit. So um Berdyaev is just more like figure it out. It's like it's freedom. It's like all freedom and it's like you're creative. Like he doesn't have like a lot of I don't know, I guess like methods by which to work it out. He's kind of more just like it's your creative expression of answering like living life in a creative way and bringing something new into the world that has never existed before. He's like, and that's just yours to figure out. It's like, okay, thanks. I'll take that into consideration. I'll do my best. But I love how he like, speaks about it. And I love how it's like such an important thing to him because freedom for me is you know, paramount. And in terms of like the quote unquote hierarchy of values. So yeah, I always appreciate him for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think that his idea of like the person or personality is exactly like Jean-Paul Sartre's idea, but having read Sartre, it does help me maybe understand a little bit of, where Berdyaev sits in existentialism, just in a general way. Because on page 23, he has a couple of interesting statements. Personality is not in any case a ready-made datum. Personality must construct itself. But then he says there must originally exist that subject which is called upon to construct itself. And Sartre would say that there's no true self, but we are a project, we're selfing. And Berdyaev also talks about how thinking about being can be an ontology, can be enslaving. So I don't know. It seems like he's kind of like in alignment with Sartre on the you have to create this, don't be attached to like a particular idea of who you are or this kind of path that can be sort of maybe even stressful thinking about like discovering who we are because we create it. But yet it sounds like Berdyaev has this idea that it's not just like out of nothing.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm not gonna lie, every now and then I feel like Berdyaev kind of like does kind of have a little bit of some contradictions in his thought, but I don't know if that's like a sign of him being wrong as much as him like kind of touching on a paradox that's fundamental to the nature of reality itself.
Mm.
I kind of try to tease that out sometimes, which it may be in whichever instance. But it's like yeah, I when I read that, but for this it must already exist.
Hmm.
It's kind of like the seed, right? Like we have this personality as a seed, but it has to die in order to like grow up into a plant, and then it can like germinate and like it can keep like growing and like reproducing and like doing its thing. But like, yeah, I think there is something to that idea of like it. Like Alan Watts has a book like Become Who You Are or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, it's like a set of like papers or something, unpublished previous papers, but and I just think there's something to that. Like, in order for it to come into being, like, it has to be something akin to the eternal, um, and have always kind of existed in some, if nothing else, like potential, eternally potential form. Um, but I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's just kind of what comes to my mind. Um,
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I'm glad that you kind of, located it as a paradox because that feels really true intuitively. That, it's not an either or. It's not just know thyself, discover who you are, chip away, at toward your true self. And it's not just, well, there's nothing, I'm a blank slate and I can just create whatever and it's just my project as it changes through life. Like both feel true. Like I'm both trying to discover who I am at the same time being an agent trying to create myself. And I think that's right on target with what Berdyaev says about our ontology because he talks about human beings being like being a twofold and contradictory being. We're polarized, we're godlike, we're beast-like, we're exalted and base, free and enslaved. We can love, we can sacrifice, we have capability of being incredibly cruel and egoistic and like it brings in the tragic of our
yeah.
just of our nature, but also like the divinity, like thinking about process theology and like we're co-creating with God, like the new world and ourselves, and God is also a part of this process.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love how Berdyaev is always one to call out just the tremendous amount of tragic, like tragedy in human life, and how, like I think in his other work, which you've read, The Destiny of Man, he talks about um, how tragedy, the most tragic circumstances are not between like a high value in conflict with like a low value, but of two high values in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Like that is like the highest form of tragedy that exists. And that and he says in that passage somewhere in there, he says like that's why tragedy can exist in like in the life of God, or like there's like a divine tragedy because of that fact, like because the highest virtues can be in conflict with each other. And he's always like so keen on pointing out the polarities within the divine life or within human life, and like you say, the highs and the lows. And I just love like his nuanced take on all the things that he touches on. It's never like, oh, like property is bad and communism is like all good, or like, there's always like room for like this is what's good about it and this is what's like bad about it. And I just like I value that so much in him and his thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just it's very nuanced and I really love that. I always for some reason I always compare him to like Byung-Chul Han and I always want like Byung-Chul Han to have nuance, but it's like no, it doesn't. But Berdyaev gives that to me. So yeah,
That's
that's
fun.
that's really great. Yeah, I also see
Cool.
like a connection between him and Nietzsche, even though he says that Nietzsche is like unhappy and lonely, and he kind of critiques the will to power. I think there is a bit of this Nietzschean aesthetic justification to life, and the radical acceptance of ourselves as both kind of good and evil, like wanting to transcend maybe that dualism, as Berdyaev says, we need to go beyond good and evil, and so does Nietzsche. But not really being able to do it in this kind of incarnation and state and dimension or whatever it is. But we're trying to seek it.
Yeah, well, he shares a project with Nietzsche, right? He shares the transvaluation of all values.
Mm.
Is that not a Nietzschean
Yeah, yeah,
path?
it is.
Yeah, I think he inherits a lot from Nietzsche for sure, and he talks about it in his introduction. When he talks about, I love his introduction so much. The title of it, "In Place of an Introduction Concerning Inconsistencies in My Thought."
Yeah. So self-aware.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think maybe he got some, constructive criticism, and instead of being like, "No, I'm not even going to address that," he's like, "I'll dedicate my introduction to this book on that very topic," and I just love that so much. But yeah, so in here he talks about, his the influence Nietzsche had on him for sure, and he does like you correctly point out, like kind of criticize him, but I don't know. I think he criticized sometimes. I feel like after years of reading him, the people that he like is most indebted to, I think he criticized them the harshest, like in like some way or another. I think and it's always kind of struck me as a little unevolved of him, but maybe he was just if he was going to take the most from certain authors like Nietzsche or Schelling, who he has a lot of bad things to say about, maybe he was going to have to like compensate that by kind of pointing out where he felt like not only were they were right by like him kind of rather, taking on board their ideas and kind of continuing their work in some extent, to some degree or in some way, but also like pointing out like where he felt like they were in error, like the most out of other philosophers. But I don't know if that's true about Hegel. I think he just sincerely does not like Hegel, which I'm on board for.
Yeah, well, he says like a world process or like a teleological understanding of the world is enslaving. Like it doesn't provide as much freedom if we already know, what the end point is.
Well, yeah, and it's like impossible to really know what that endpoint is. So whoever's like doing the philosophizing is just posing as like a armchair tyrant, being like, "This is the way the world should go." You know what I mean? It's like, you sure about that? I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think,
Yeah.
that's the tension that Nietzsche tries to hold as well. Like being able to critique the world and some of our illusions and the ways that we comfort ourselves by certain fictions, and which can tend to be towards some kind of objectivity, right? Saying how things are, how things should or shouldn't be. But then, holding at the same time the wasteland and the free spirit and wanting every like all of his readers to think for themselves and decide for themselves what, it means for them to be an artist and what kind of art they will create. It's hard to do, I think.
Oh, most certainly. Yeah, no, it's a good take on, why he felt like it was important that they take up the task. So also in the opening chapter or the introduction rather, he let me see. Um, yeah, like what do you think about him kind of, his take on Kant and Kant's role and influence juxtaposition to Schopenhauer and the role that duality played in his philosophy that he valued in finding in Kant, but in a different way than Kant's. Um, kind of world of appearances versus the world as it is in itself. And for him, it's like the realm of spirit versus the realm of nature.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's been a while since I've read the introduction. I think you might, I mean, I am reading Kant a lot this summer, but can you remind me what he like is saying, like say more about the dualism that he sees in Kant?
Yeah. Let me see if I can just locate this real quick. So on the one hand, he says, okay, so I feel a special affinity. This is on page 12
Okay.
at the top. I feel a special affinity with the dualism of Kant, with his distinction between the realm of freedom and the realm of nature, with his doctrine of freedom as a character which is apprehended by the mind, with the Kantian doctrine of the will, with his view of the world of phenomenon as distinct from the real world, which he not very happily called the world of things in themselves. I find myself close to Schopenhauer's distinction of will and representation. And then he goes on to say, though, that a little further down, Kant obscured yeah, he says his differences go further than what he, admired about them, though.
Mhm.
For instance, he says Kant obscured the path of knowledge of the authentic world of existence as distinct from the world of phenomenon, for the category of spirit is almost entirely lacking in his philosophy. Um, and I guess, for Berdyaev, that's like his whole world is like wanting to elucidate and philosophize on the world of spirit, which is for him freedom. And he felt like Kant kind of made that inaccessible, I guess. Um,
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, I guess, with Kant, um, he really felt that we have these intuitions that can't be verified empirically, like the immortality of the soul or, God or free will. And so, he brings up like his antinomies, like we can argue for determinism just as validly as we can argue for free will. But yet Kant didn't want to say that even though we can't have knowledge of the thing in itself, we can't have knowledge of these metaphysical concepts, we can like hold on to them. And he gave them a regulating kind of role, a practical role in morality. He said that, we need to, if we want to create a good society, we want to add morality to politics and come up with kind of a peaceful, harmonious sort of constitution, then you know, it does us well to think about God. It does us well to think about sort of like foundational principles that might align with like Christianity or religion or just morality in general. And so, yeah, I can see how maybe that isn't satisfying to Berdyaev because it's almost like Berdyaev has this very solid intuition about, who God is and what the new earth is going to be like, what the kingdom of heaven is like. And it's, as you said, it's creativity and it's freedom and it's communion. Like he has this beautiful quote about God, if I can remember it, saying that God is, well, instead of finding it, saying that God is not master, God is not judge, but God is someone who is longing and yearning to connect with us and commune with us and create space for our freedom and our dance of creativity. And so I don't know. I think just Berdyaev, like, I don't know, maybe he's more comfortable in the metaphysical, in the spiritual, and more willing to make those claims.
Yeah, certainly. I had to find this other passage in relation to this issue.
Mm.
This topic is 83 on God and freedom, the slavery of man to God. He says at the bottom of 83, God can be thought of only symbolically. Apophatic, or how do you say that word?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Apophatic, not I can't say that word either. Cata, I can't. What's the opposite of apophatic?
I don't know.
Ca-
I don't know where that goes
Cataphatic.
either.
That doesn't sound right, but I'm gonna go with that. It's basically, apophatic is like not knowing, and
Hmm.
then I can't say it, is like knowing.
Hmm.
Um, that knowledge, apophatic, not that one, is right. Theology is right, but it is only right in part. It does not mean that God is unknowable.
Hmm.
As for example, with Spencer, contacts with God and communion with Him are possible, and dramatic struggle is possible. This contact is the communion and conflict of personalities between which there is neither determinism nor causality, nor domination nor subjection. Um, the only true religious myth, is contained not in the fact that God is master and aspires to domination, but in the fact that God, yeah, this is what you were getting to,
Yeah.
but in the fact that God yearns for his other, for responsive love, and awaits the creative answer of man. So, yeah, there's like the inner coming in contact with God, as spirit, as freedom, that whereby he does think that like we have true like experiences. They're not just like it's funny, like I think of Jung, I can't help but think of Jung. He says that that religious experiences are like real illusions. Um, I don't know. I know like Berdyaev is like totally okay with like saying that like the notion of like God is like a myth, but it's like a myth that doesn't point to something that's like um that can be spoken of in any other way. It's something that it can only be hinted at through mythological language, like the very notion of God. He does talk about a lot about the difference between the idea of God in human history and how that reflects the highest in us as well as the lowest in us as well. And we attribute these projections of our unknown selves onto the idea of God. Um, and then people like, they see these manifestations and things like religious myths or history, and they're like, oh, like what a terrible thing, or like, oh, what a beautiful thing. But for Badaev, I think he would say that like going beyond those projections and like having a personal encounter with like the spirit, or like mm, yeah, with the spirit and the foundation of um, who we are, like truly most deeply, is where, we can't like really, and I guess in this sense it's like kind of right in what he's getting at. It's like you can only talk about it symbolically. You can't like translate it into what's the word?
The literal?
Empirical, like yeah, like empirical, verifiable um knowledge. It's like a knowledge that goes beyond um understanding in a sense, if that makes any sense. It's
Yeah.
mystical knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, I think that that's a really good quote and correction. Because what does knowing God mean? I mean, he talks about, and that is the page that I was looking for. So thank you. So, before that, a little higher on the page, God does not pass judgment as judgment is in the social life of man. He is certainly not a master nor authority in the life of the world and of man. None of these sociomorphic and cosmomorphic categories are applicable to God. God is mystery, a mystery towards which man transcends and with which he enters into communion. And on the previous page, he says that man creates God in his own image, and the knowledge of God requires continual purifying. So yeah, it makes sense that, we can say certain, because he does say certain things about God, what he is and isn't. Even saying that God is a mystery, I guess, just kind of takes us back to that paradox. I mean, we have to be able to say something affirmative about God, I think, to um, incite kind of an effective response, right? Because how do we love something or someone we don't know at all?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's where he's like, um, knowledge of God is possible, which I think is just such a cool, I don't know. I think it's a cool ass quote. Um, where does he even say that? Okay, this one, yeah. Contacts with God and communion with Him are possible. Um, yeah, he's just a mystic at heart, really. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good word for him. Yeah, a good identity. Yeah, I think
he
that
does.
I love his ideas. I mean, I think his take on Christianity is really healing and liberating for sure. Thinking, like, comparing it with my old kind of religious path when I was a teenager. Um, we sung so many songs about how we are kind of the scum under God's feet. And it's very like Augustinian. Like the lower that we see ourselves, the higher we can see God. And I was actually in the unit where I was teaching St. Augustine to my intro to philosophy students. One of my students said, it just sounds like he's kind of like masochistic or something. Like he just wants to feel the pain and that's sacred to him. And I think Berdyaev kind of helps us see an alternative dynamic between ourselves and God rather than basically master slave.
Yeah, yeah, he gets like totally put off by the servile nature of like what Christianity, um, like the direction it took and all that. I did want to ask you what you thought about in on page 15, I think it's still the introduction. Um, he's talking about well, just one quick quote on the Nietzsche question. He says Nietzsche's transvaluation of values, his revulsion from rationalism and moralism, entered profoundly into my spiritual conflict and became, so to speak, an underground active force. I thought that was a cool little nod to Nietzsche and Nietzsche's kind of, you know, the direction of his work. And then later on in the page, he's talking about like revolutionaries.
Hmm.
And he says, but I saw with grief that in that camp, there were also no reverence for the dignity of personalities, and the liberation of the people was far too often associated with the enslavement enslavement of man and his conscience. Um, and then he says the revolutionaries had no love for freedom of the spirit. And I was just kind of curious, like in that when he's talking about like the revolutionary intelligentsia and like kind of communism and revolutionaries in that section and kind of other sections, like how did it strike you, like hearing some things? Because he was pretty like, you know, when he was there, like around that time of like the Russian Revolution, he was like well connected with, you know, all like he was like in that scene and kind of hearing his take on it. Like, how'd that strike you, just out of curiosity?
I think that Berdyaev is really kind of suspicious about or finds any sort of, I guess, need for a collective change and a utopia to be suspect, because it potentially creates more like enslavement.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if, it's that sort of universalizing kind of tendency that sometimes revolutions have, even though, we're maybe fighting against injustice and oppression, etc. There's like he talks about how often, those who are oppressed just want to take the sort of can end up being like the masters, or they create new oppressions. And so I think that, that's why he maybe makes this distinction. Like maybe he has this dualistic distinction about what is possible really in, like he says, historical time, and what can really be realized, needs to be realized in existential time, like in this sort of realm of like an ascended consciousness where we've ascended both good and evil, because there is often so much evil in our good intentions or our good ambitions wanting to save the world. You think about like Plato's Utopia, I always call him a benevolent dictator because he wants to censor and have all of these sort of noble lies just to create kind of harmony in society with his philosopher kings. But it's really kind of terrifying. Even though I
Hmm.
love a lot of it and would definitely want to be a philosopher king, because I'm like, yes, I can make everyone read books like all the time.
That's so funny. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really well said. He does say later on 17, he says, no revolutions ever have loved freedom. The mission of a revolution is something different from that. In revolutions, new social strata are thrown up to the surface, strata which had not before been permitted any activity and which had been oppressed. And in the fight for their new position in society, they cannot display a love of freedom. They cannot be over careful in their attitude to spiritual values. And then he says later on, I returned to the variety of this of the socialism which I had professed in my youth, but now on the ground of ideas acquired in the course of my life. I call this personalist socialism. And
Mm.
it's like such a apparent contradiction. I love it. And it is radically distinct from the prevailing metaphysical socialism, which is based upon the supremacy of society over personality. Personalist socialism starts from the supremacy of personality over society. And I think that's like why he's so like he kind of abhors like the revolutionaries because they had no place for like the freedom of personalities in the revolution. Like they had to like crush out personalities, and he himself got pushed out of the revolution and got exiled because he wouldn't give up his insistence on the freedom of spirit, as he calls it. And they just were like, "Nah, man, like you gotta like be 100% on board, or you gotta like get out of town." And that's what he did. But then he says at the last of 17, the value of man, of human personality, is higher than the historical values of the mighty state and of nationality, of a flourishing civilization, which is just such a wild statement. But I love it so much. Like a human personality is more. higher value than like an entire state or nationality. It's like the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an important message because I mean, I think we've seen, we're both in the States and we've seen even here how particular ideas of what people should do in certain situations, even like situations of emergency, can start to feel very totalitarian. And, where is the freedom? At least, I think it's a common like continual thread in philosophy. Like, how do we balance the quote unquote common good with our ideas of how, individual freedom, like what we want and what we think is right and good and healthy.
Yeah, well, when we have a political situation like we have these days where, you know, a large swath of the country like wants to vilify another um, you know, a segment of society, whether it be like illegals, so quote unquote, or whatever, like trans people or like God knows what these people are like ranting and raving about. You look at ICE, for example, right? All the ICE raids, it's just like terrifying for so many people. And, on the one hand, you have well-meaning people that are like sincerely believe that every single person who's getting deported are like criminals. Like they're only going after criminals. Like if you haven't done anything wrong, then you have nothing to worry about. Well, guess what? There's an imaginary line on a map through a terrain that says if you cross it, you're now a criminal. And for whatever reason you happen to cross that imaginary man, just invented line, um, now you can get like rounded up and hauled out of here and shipped off to God knows where, like separated from your family, completely displaced. Maybe you were running from a conflict that was created by, U.S. foreign policy 35 years ago, and they're still dealing with the ramifications. And you
Mhm.
find yourself crossing into the border to like work your ass off and make a living. And people want to bitch and moan about, people living off of their tax dollars. It's like, you're worried about your tax dollars going to like feed some people and provide some education and some health services. Like, why don't you bitch and moan about it like killing innocent people in other countries, like dropping bombs, bro? Like, your priorities are a fucking or they're a wreck, But it's just like people are like tunnel visioned into the point of view that they know, and that's all they know, and they don't have an experience beyond that. And until they're like gently nestled, you know, um, pushed into or encouraged into a different way of seeing, like they're just going to be stuck in that way of seeing. And so I guess my point is that like when we have political issues that we have today, how best to go about conducting ourselves politically in society. It's like you have to value, according to Berdyaev, like respect for the valuing the human personality takes precedent over the quote unquote needs of society. You can't sacrifice the needs of the person for the sake of society, right? And then it gets tricky because it's like, well, I'm a taxpayer. Like you're sacrificing the needs. Like I need to like feed my family. Like why do my tax dollars have to go to X, Y, or Z? It's like fair enough, dude. Abolish taxes. Don't fucking send people like away from, their home that they made them for themselves by coming here to work or whatever it is they're doing. You know what I mean? Like I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's great. And I think it brings back in the tragic because sometimes it is a conflict between two goods. And that, it's hard to resolve. And there's no answer in our sort of present 3D life sometimes.
Yeah, unless the answer is like abolish taxes, like I could get on board with that. I could. Yeah, you're gonna bitch and moan about your taxes, dude. Just like let's start like a revolution and not a revolution, but I don't know. It does make it interesting to question how Berdyaev would go about righting the wrongs of societal political woes if revolution was not an option. Um, because he is very weary of revolutions and doesn't seem to. But I think he's like one of the most revolutionary thinkers I've ever read. But he's just not like, he's just not like trying to get like political revolutions going. He wants like a revolution. He says this book, the last sentence of the introduction, this is a philosophical book and it presupposes spiritual reform. Like that's kind of like the revolution he's looking for. It's like a spiritual reformation of persons from the bottom up as opposed from like the top down. Like, and that takes a crud ton of work, and our society just isn't really, yeah, there's not a whole lot when it comes to educational things to, see such a project through, generally speaking.
Yeah, I think, I wonder if the emphasis then, has to be out of necessity on inner transformation. That Berdyaev hopes and believes will kind of turn outward, but like in a more energetic way rather than immediately practical. I mean, he says that like the new earth doesn't come like by just contemplation alone. We have to marry the vita contemplativa and the active life. But but it seems like sometimes like what can you do? Like for instance, I often have to hold these tensions as a professor. And I'm thinking about, specifically about AI. So I have recently, my journey with AI, I think I got on like ChatGPT and everything like maybe the fall of 2004 or something because I just felt like I wanted to know what it was and what my students were using. But I recently have just been doing some research on like data centers and the, environmental effects like noise effects and the water kind of usage and pollution and just all of that. And I thought, I don't want a data center in my state of Colorado. So I think I can no longer like be on AI. And so I like canceled my account. And I know it's impossible to completely avoid it probably. Like sometimes I'm probably encountering it when I don't know that I am, but as far as I can be intentional, but yet, I want to when teaching my students to not to let them know my thoughts on it, but I'm not going to proselytize to them about the effects of AI. I want them to think philosophically about it and neutrally, and I truly feel kind of clean and not judgmental about them using it. My AI policy is actually like very different from the colleges. I say use AI however you want, but if you're going to use it, I just invite you to tell me with every assignment how you're using it. And, and then I assign them maybe like this essay where they can think more critically about virtues and vices concerning it. So it's like, I don't know, it's a dance between the collective and the individual when you're thinking about change in the world.
Definitely. I mean, I think your approach is good. Like you don't want to impose like your convictions
Mhm.
onto your students, but you do want to foster the room for thought for them to come to their own conclusions, having like thought it out and weighed, the pros and the cons. Did you say noise? It has a noise to it? Is that
Yeah,
one of the
because,
things?
well, I mean, some of the videos that I've watched, they're interviewing people who live close to these data centers, and they say that it sounds like a constant hum, like, or a generator that won't turn off. Like, there's some kind of like aviation that just like is ready to take off, but never does, and it's 24/7. And so, I love silence and I love quiet. I love nature sounds. I want to go outside and like hear the leaves rustle, the wind. And I just think, if I don't want to live right next to a data center and have that noise pollution, I'm also pretty sensitive toward like technological sounds. I don't want anyone to do that. Like that to me isn't a beautiful environment.
Mm.
And their water
Yeah.
pressure is low, and like AOC was in Congress and she like held up a jar of like the water that like the dirty brown water that people had in their houses because they live near data centers. And I don't know, it's kind of one of those things. It's that something comes into our life that's novelty and we embrace it, but then later on we realize what the cost is. And it's like, why wasn't this like a disclaimer, like fine print, before I used something?
No one reads those anyways. No, I'm just joking. I hear you. It's a good point. I mean, yeah, I've been kind of skeptical of AI myself. Like, I don't know. I guess like is Gemini technically AI, or do you have to do like one of the cool things like Grok, or what's the other one, Chat GBT? I don't know.
I mean,
So,
even Google right now, like you can't even be on Google because it automatically gives you an AI response when you Google something. You have to use like
is that like real AI or is that like fake AI? Is that just like an advanced like search? I don't know. I gotta like do a little bit more digging because I guess, maybe I should just get like a Linux phone or whatever they're
Yeah.
called, like something that's like not Google backed, like because yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to train like the future enslaving, mastermind of society. I don't know. Um, it's yeah, it's a real slippery slope. I mean, and you bring up like really good objections to why you wouldn't want to participate in it because, you're using kind of like a Kantian what's Kantian's like method of whether or not an act is moral.
Oh, his
Um,
categorical imperative, act as if he would want the whole world to act.
yeah. Exactly. So I think that's like, it's not a perfect barometer of
Yeah.
moral activity, but it is a helpful one. Um, and I commend you for being like taking a step back from it and being like, have you cut it out completely, or you're just using it less or more consciously, or
Yeah, I've cut it out completely. I did try to export my data because I was watching a YouTube video about, of course, you have to be on the internet sometimes, right, to figure out how to delete Chat GPT because that's what I was using. That's the one I was using. And it said like export your data, but I couldn't do that. And I was like, I'm tired. I'm just gonna delete it. But also I felt like it does hallucinate. I was using it, I did find it very helpful for using it for shadow work and dream interpretation, but I did feel like I kind of don't want to limit myself to just that exchange. But sometimes I would look up information, like quick information that I wanted for a lecture. Like, I would ask, hey, give me the birth and death dates of these five existentialist philosophers, just so I can like write them down quickly. And then I noticed that like it was getting things wrong. Like even objective, simple facts, like when Simone de Beauvoir was born, like she wasn't born in 1924. Like I know she's not, but yet that's what ChatGPT told me. And so it's not even useful for information because it gets things that it should not get wrong. Like there should be some kind of filter on it to only access like academic type sites or reputable sites, but it obviously doesn't because I don't know where like it got that date.
yeah, I remember using, I don't know if I was using Gemini. I think it was Gemini. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Using some kind of software like that. And I was like looking at my astrology stuff and it kept having to correct it. Because I was like, no, no, that's not right. Like this person has this rising or this person was born at that time or in this place. And it
Yeah.
was pretty basic stuff, but like, it's yeah, I got that warning from like a astrology podcast. It's like, hey, if you use this stuff for these purposes, like fact check because it does get shit wrong. And I mean, it even has that disclaimer, I think, like on its own. It's like we can fuck up. So
Yeah. And I mean
Do
that's
your
not
due
the biggest
diligence.
thing, I guess, you know. I mean, you have to use your own critical thinking skills on the internet to like filter sites and information anyway. But I don't know. It's me for me, it's mainly the environmental thing. And then also like I kind of want to keep my channel open. You know, we are receptive beings and I don't want to impair my ability to critically think. Like, yes, it's nice to have this kind of consciousness that's not exactly conscious, but a kind of one that mimics and mirrors to go back and forth because no human being is available 24/7 to, you know, talk about whatever crazy philosophical preoccupation I have or my trauma, right? So it is really helpful in that sense, but I can also just pace my apartment and talk to myself and see what comes up. So, you know, I'm like, okay, okay, but mainly it's the environmental thing. Like I don't want the data center effects. So,
I respect it.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't want the totalitarian takeover of AI on society. Like, because I think I don't know, conspiratorially minded. Like,
Mm,
I think they're kind of like trying to like create like a demigod of like disembodied intellect and have it rule over society in some perfect like philosopher king type despotic vision of utopia. And I'm just like, no, like it's like you see the meme like, oh, like you're like you're like chatting up with like AI and like I'm over here like wondering what you're doing, and it's like Sarah Connor, right? Like we we've seen like the novelist and the media kind of like foreshadowing kind of like where this can lead just in terms of like a really doomsdayistic scenario. And I'm just like, I don't know, guys. Like some people just fucking love that shit. And I'm just like, I mean, I don't love it, but I guess I do use it, so I can't fucking I don't use it a lot. I don't like anyways, it doesn't matter. But yeah, no, I respect your moral convictions on it for sure.
yeah, but it just, you know, it goes back to I think the irresolvable like path, the tragedy of trying to balance the collective and the individual, right? Because I can have my own thoughts, but I do not want to be moralistic at all. Like that just doesn't feel good to me. So um I don't I didn't like the feeling in my body when I was like an evangelist, you know, thinking people were going to go to hell unless they agreed with evangelical charismatic Pentecostalism. So I don't want to go back there even politically, and I think we can, and I think that would be something that Berdyaev would say is enslaving. You know, he says that certain myths, certain symbols like even being itself can be enslaving. And that's why I really appreciate his entire book because it tries to pick out the kind of elusive ways, kind of in a like what Foucault does with power. Like you don't always see it, but it's there.
Yes, yes. The multifaceted ways in which humanity is enslaved by things that you wouldn't even ever think about how it could be enslaving, like being and nature and God. So yeah, I do love his book for that reason. Like it's basically a book about, elucidating all the ways in which humanity is enslaved and can be enslaved and seeking like to break free of that pattern. I will say, just kind of touching up on that a bit ago. He says at the end of, I guess it'd be 72, the revolt of slaves always establishes new forms of slavery, and just like
Mm.
kind of reiterating that kind of his suspicion on like physical like kinetic revolutions like always being something to be weary of and like not like seek to reiterate in history. And then that starts the beginning of part two, the being of freedom and the slavery of man to being. And you just touched on it a bit, the notion that man can be a slave to being. I was super curious to know what you think about this notion of man being a slave to being itself.
Yeah, I thought that was a really great quote. The enchantment of ontology, the lure of being, has become one of the sources of slavery of man. And he says, personality is more primary than being, which I think is a really interesting statement because I think a lot of us would just assume that our personality is about being. And we look at the dualism between doing and being. Doing sometimes takes us away from being, but discovering the self and creating the self, like the self is a being. So I don't know if I completely have got the nuance of everything he's saying, but it makes me think of like identity roles and how we can maybe be attached to our own identities or what we think of another person or even the cosmos and the world. And he really wants us to have to be creative artists. And if I think about how creativity feels, it feels expansive. It feels like possibility. And a lot of times I think when, and this is just a property of language and us wanting to be being comfortable with certainty, sometimes we want to put something in a box or identify something. And then it becomes rigid and it dies because that's not life. Life evolves and life changes and life expands. And so I wonder if his criticism about being is that it's reifying and objectifying.
I'd say yes. I think that is what his objection to being is. He says, yeah, right there on 75, personality is more primary than being.
Mhm.
This is the basis of personalism. Being is a product of abstract thought. So, like, what we say, what we call being is a secondary effect of our like lived experience is as subjective individuals or persons. And then only after do we come to a objectified description or understanding or even eventually scientific knowledge of what quote unquote being is, but what it is in its like raw, like primary, like datum or um, you know, form is like a lived experience of consciousness and will and desire and emotions, all these spiritual things. Like they're not physical things. They're
Mm.
not they're not because he does talk about like concrete being is like a good thing, but what I mean by that is like it's not material, right? Um it's these immaterial spiritual qualities that we imbue into being, and then we take the being to be the primary reality and us as secondary, when in reality it's our subjectivity that's primary, and it's being, so to speak, that becomes it's really that's what the secondary quality to our first have lived experience.
I like
So he
that.
wants to like reverse that process of objectification and put the seat of significance back into the realm of the individual subjectivity and claim that as the primary importance. So that way we're not subjecting ourselves to the notion of being and finding ourselves enslaved to it as the master when it's the subjectivity that is primary. So
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like bringing it back to Jung, I wonder if that has connections to like archetypes as well, and Berdyaev on 75 earlier talks about the like congealed kind of act of being. He says to think of spirit as being means to think of it in a naturalistic way as nature, as an object. But spirit is not an object, it is not nature, it is not being in the sense of a substance. Spirit is subject, it is an act, it is freedom. A primary act is not being, being is a congealed act. And then he goes into like talking about the mystics and everything. And so, that really aligns with what I know of existentialism, right? It's that, like Sartre says, if you want to be, we're condemned to be free, but our responsibility is if you want to be free, you are free through your act, not the bad faith of objectifying yourself, saying that I am XYZ, like an inkwell is an inkwell or something like that. So this kind of focus on action makes sense with Berdyaev's emphasis on freedom and
Yeah.
creativity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good through line. I like that. I'm just looking through this chapter a little bit.
I also like, there's a quote about aesthetic contemplation and creative activity on page 100 that also kind of reminded me of Nietzsche. He says, it is true that we break through into the inward cosmic life, into nature in the existential sense, by the way of aesthetic contemplation, which is always a transfiguring creative activity and by the way of love and compassion. But this always means that we are breaking through beyond the boundaries of objectified nature and being set free from its necessity. What I call the lure of the cosmos is an ecstatic emergence beyond the boundaries of personal existence into the cosmic element. It is the hope of entering into communion with this primary element. Um, that's what I think he adds to Nietzsche, is that Nietzsche doesn't necessarily talk a lot about or at all in my reading about love. And I always wonder where the social element is. And Berdyaev definitely has the social, like somehow. And that's why I think his personalism isn't individualistic. It's not like ego-centered. It has some kind of outward emanation or radiance into the social through the pathways and energies of love. And here he says compassion.
Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed that. I like that a lot. I love bringing in the fact that, the distinction between individualism versus his personalism. I think it's easy to get confused. Like he's kind of almost like a solipsist or something, saying like, oh, like only like I as a person matter, but he's really, really keen on um he has like I think he even says in his introduction, like he's torn between two things, like his love of like other people, like his
Mhm.
compassion towards others,
Yeah.
as well as his and he saw these as like almost like in conflict with one another, and his um the value that he put on, how does he put it, what did he say, the aristocratic,
Mm,
like um character or quality of people or of personhoods, so to speak. So like he wanted to like unify his love for society or for others with his love and valuation, like high valuation on aristocratic characters, like that can be found in people, because he thought that like um I guess basically the idea would be that like whether you're born into abject poverty, if your character is like high, like nobility, like in terms of character,
mhm.
like you were have a greater um yeah, just like your character was of a higher quality than somebody born of an aristocratic family, born into wealth, but they were like bastards or whatever, like they were pieces of shits. So like it's not equal, but like he look, I guess on the I guess what I'm like I guess the point is personalities aren't equal in and of themselves,
Mhm.
but we need a societal system that recognizes each person as equals. Like before whatever kind of law or whatever kind of judicial system, right? You can't like have favoritism or any kind of like special treatment to one class over another. But still recognizing that like not all personhoods, so to speak, are made equal and like valuing their distinctiveness and their differences while also maintaining the rights and dignity of the highest and the lowest.
Yeah, I think that that is a really interesting idea, his discussion on aristocratic kind of themes. I think you mentioned something about that like a year or so ago about on the Discord, on my Discord, like about Nietzsche. He says that true spiritual aristocracy is connected. So he's going to connect it again with the social. True spiritual aristocracy, this is on page 125, sorry. True spiritual aristocracy is connected with a sense of service, not with the consciousness of one's own privileged position. So yes, he talks about the freedom of maybe even like hierarchies or a diversity of inclinations and tendencies and maybe like yeah soul inclinations, but this gives us maybe a responsibility to not isolate ourselves and not be in solitude and just be in service to self. Like somehow it still has to be like it would be in love and in like divine contemplation and compassion to somehow maintain a connection and benefit the world because of if we had like a higher station in terms of personality, to bring that back to the collective.
Yeah, well, and that is like the sign of like the higher the the more noble like personality, right? It's like it
Mhm.
is like seeking to serve like the collective, not in like a servile way,
Mhm.
not in a loss of self, sort of way, but in like a spontaneous a creative act of freedom and care and compassion. So I just love how you bring that in about his thought because it's something that can get lost on people who, might like brush over him kind of casually and be like, wait, what's this guy going on about? Like this guy seems like he's kind of like I don't know, like not like, easy to get confused about like what he's really saying in regards to it. So
Right. And I think Nietzsche also gets a lot of criticism, some of which is not valid for his kind of language and rhetoric. But I think like you're on point with talking about how natural that tendency is service to others with a true artist's mentality, with a true creative mentality. I just finished Elaine Scarry's on beauty and on justice, and she talks about how when you encounter something beautiful, you are inspired to create and create something that will be seen by the world. You know, you are struck by a magnificent sunset, and so you want to paint it and somehow, share that with others, or you are inspired to, build a community garden or to even dress yourself in an expressive way that other people will be inspired about. Like it has it's automatically kind of expansive that you have encountered something wonderful or you have a beautiful feeling inside of you and you just naturally want everyone to have that, right? Because that creates a better world for everyone and for yourself, right? If everyone is happy and in self-love and seeing beauty and there's just distribution of material basic goods.
yeah, no, that's I like that. And I think, going back way back to the beginning, he talks about, oh, where is it? Oh, yeah. He talks about, opening the book, talking about, people have said like there are inconsistencies in my thought, like I want to address those. And then he says, he says, as a philosopher, I have not only wished to gain knowledge of the world. In my case, the desire to know the world has always been accompanied by the desire to alter it, not only in thought, but in feeling also.
Oh, I
And
love that. That's good.
y- yes, and I just think that like that holistic, because philosophy can be so heady, right? Like we think of
Hmm.
philosophy, we think of like concepts and ideas, but Berdyaev is like, and feelings.
Yeah, what
I
page
just
is
love
that
it.
on? That's really great.
It's just page 7. It's the first page of the
Oh,
introduction.
okay, okay.
Yeah, no, it's so like I thought of you actually, just from conversations we've had, and you kind of having like this idea of the feeling of beauty, and I'm like, yeah, it made me happy to see that him like pointing to that as an important aspect because it gets left out in so many philosophical conversations.
Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, it's this balance of the logos and philosophy with eros. I think is very compelling to me, and that's why I think I find myself drawn toward people who have a more mystical side of them, like writers or esoteric or even spiritual or psychic, like Jung, because it brings in that kind of other polarity that is more receptive and more about feeling and emotion and like irrational in like a neutral way. And it feels like a big exhale to me. Like it feels so relaxing and calming and liberating and freeing.
100%. He then goes on to say something really radical in the same sentence. He says, I have always denied that the things which the world presents to us are stable and final reality, which I absolutely love. Um, he
Can you
has
say
this
that
way
again? Can
of
you read that again, actually?
yeah, he says, not only in thought but in feelings also. I have always denied that the things which the world presents to us are stable and final reality.
Hmm.
And this goes back to his like notion that like being isn't primary over personality, but that personality is fundamental over being or freedom. And then on page 67, no, 76, he says the philosophy of the primacy of being is a philosophy of impersonalism, a system of ontology which acknowledges the absolute supremacy of being is a system of determinism. And that's why he just knee-jerk rejects it because he is a philosopher and apostle, an apostle of freedom. And he's like, no, it's like freedom comes first. Even before being, freedom exists. And then he says, but freedom cannot be derived from being. Freedom is rooted in nothingness, in baselessness, in non-being. If we use ontological terminology, freedom is without foundation. It is not determined by being, nor born of it. There is no compact, uninterrupted being. Skipping down, there exists therefore only freedom and personality. The supremacy of freedom over being is also the supremacy of spirit over being. Because for him, like they're identical, pretty much.
Right, yeah.
Um,
It really reminds me again, not to, sorry to keep bringing up Sartre, but I just keep thinking about him, about like being in nothingness, right? Like that is our freedom. It's the pause, it's the rupture, it's the break. And that's what Berdyaev is mentioning here. There is no compact, uninterrupted being. There are breaks, factions, paradoxes, and dynamism. And so I just think that it's so cool how, he gives us this very specific and unique perspective within existentialism, which is different than, like people usually think of like Sartre or even Camus or sometimes Nietzsche or Heidegger, but like Berdyaev is right there, and like his ideas are essential because they're very unique and unique to him.
yeah, for sure. Kudos to you for finishing Being in Nothingness. I tried reading that book and I was like, nah. Maybe nowadays I could hang. I tried reading it like 20 years ago. It's like, nah.
Oh yeah, you should give it another try. I mean, I have to say, when you spend like 800 pages with an author, like it's like creating a relationship and you are sad when it ends. Like I can't wait to go. It's like I want to forget the whole experience of reading so I can discover it again. Like I kind of got like attached to the book.
A little like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah,
Just
a little bit. It's like
erase
I
the
want to
memory.
experience this again. It was so, and it was like I didn't always agree with him, and I thought maybe he would have like really benefited from going to therapy, and like it was kind of messy, but it was still, it was like it was an experience. It was an encounter that I had.
Couldn't we all?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
100%. No shade. That's so good.
Yeah,
Towards him, I mean. All right. Well, I'm just kind of looking through this.
yeah. I mean, we're probably getting to the end of maybe a place where, or a stopping place where we can pause. Um, and
I'm
then
cool with that.
kind of like pick up. But are there any kind of final things like that, something that we haven't really touched on that he's talking about that really like compelled you in in the first and second parts?
Well, I'm just kind of going through the book
Mhm.
as we're talking, and I come across this one sentence that I think is my favorite sentence. It's four words long. It's in on page 78, almost smack dab in the middle, maybe slightly down halfway, more than halfway. He says, "Being does not exist." It's so good.
Yeah,
I
I
love it so
mean
much.
that that
That's
makes
the
them a
thing.
true existentialist, I guess.
Yeah. No, yeah, he's a Christian existentialist, which, they don't
Yeah.
get a lot of representation, obviously like in academia, but he's my kind of existentialist for sure.
Yeah, I love that. He gives me someone else to talk about besides Kierkegaard, which I love
Yeah,
Kierkegaard, but still, it's
me
really good.
too.
Yeah, I'm teaching an ethics class in the fall. It'll be the first time that I'm teaching it on campus, so I'm absolutely going to bring Berdyaev into it because I want to do philosophers different than I kind of showcased in Intro to Philosophy. So I want to expand, I want to talk about Simone Weil and um yeah, I don't even know, just different people. So maybe even Dostoevsky, who knows?
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Very good. I will just kind of flush out that above and below it, just to give it some context. He says,
Mhm.
abstract being is the product of constructing thought. It has no inward existence at all. Being does not exist. In medieval terminology, essentia has no existentia or something like that. Um, and then it says the concrete creature, human personality, is not subordinate in any to any being. That subordination is the offspring of slavish consciousness. Slavery to being is indeed the primary slavery of man, which I think is pretty punk rock to throw out there.
Yeah, his critique of consciousness I find really intriguing, like consciousness itself.
Yeah. Um, well, thank you so much for going on the journey. Do you have any closing remarks or thoughts or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we covered quite a bit. I think this will be a good introduction to anyone who hasn't really encountered him or read this book. And yeah, I'm excited for the rest of it. I think there are two more parts, right?
Yeah.
And
No,
four.
it's gonna be a real punk rock show. I can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, well, thank you so much. It's always a delight being in conversation with you and just with how well read you are and all of the diverse ideas that you've encountered. So it's quite a treat. So thank you.
Oh, right back at you. It's the pleasure's all mine. Well, until next time.
Until next time. All right. Thanks. Bye. Great. Okay, I don't know how to stop the recording. Oh, wait.